Redditors who have lost a friend or family member to a cult. How did it happen? Has anyone heard of cults in Budapest? A family friend of mine was a prominent young chess player, a grandmaster, or not a grandmaster, an international master with a GM norm, who at a stressful crossroads in life basically had a nervous breakdown at a tournament in Budapest. He went outside and somehow came into contact with a cult. He's been there for a few years. Within a couple weeks, he withdrew all the money from his bank account and asked his family not to contact him. Apparently, they were later allowed to, and he spoke broken English and was more comfortable in a Hungarian language. He was one of the smartest guys I knew. Story 2. She wasn't permanently lost, but my aunt joined the Children of God in the 70s. She was down in Texas doing student teaching, and one day her roommate called my grandparents to say she hadn't seen her in a couple of days, and was pretty sure some people took her to Mexico. My grandparents immediately drove down to Mexico, hired a cult deprogrammer, and rented a house near the cult compound. They basically blew as much money as they could afford, but never saw her before they had to give up and go back home. A little while later, my aunt called home to tell her parents she was getting married. They told her to wait until spring break and they would come down for the wedding, but she said she couldn't. A few months after that, she brought her new husband to the US to meet the family. They're still married today, and I basically just learned about the whole thing like 6 months ago. This leaves a lot of questions. Is your aunt's husband part of the cult, or were they part of the cult? Did they officially leave? I don't know what's happening. It must have been so distressing for the grandparents to go and try everything they could to save your aunt, only to have her just not show up. But it sounds like things turned out all right? Story 3. I had 2 cousins who went to Jonestown. I was born 2 years after their deaths, so everything I know is kind of family lore. They were my dad's best friends, and he rarely talked about them, but my mom was pretty open about it. The following is me paraphrasing what my mom has told me about them getting involved in the People's Temple. They joined in San Francisco. It began as a utopian community, which followed the teachings of Christ. They gave literally everything they had away. Blankets, food, whatever the group had, they would give away. At the time, communes were common, so what they were doing, moving in with a bunch of like-minded people, didn't seem that odd. To their family, it seemed like an idealistic hippie community. Then they started asking for money, always under the guise of feeding the poor or something like that. It didn't begin with asking for money because Jim was the second coming. Their parents sent all the money they had, but my cousins just kept asking for more. Eventually, this was how he isolated his members from their family. If the family kept giving money, then the members could keep in touch. If the money dried up, the family was blamed. The members were cut off from contacting them. My parents were living in Seal Beach at the time. My mom says the first time they noticed the cousins seemed a bit strange was when the cousins were on a missions trip with the Jones. I believe he was preaching at the Crystal Cathedral, and he brought a bus of his followers down. It rained, like one of these rare downpours in SoCal. The bus didn't have a windshield, so everyone was just getting soaked. So Jones walked up to the front of the bus, held out his hands, and spoke, "Storm, stop." And the rain stopped. So that was the story my cousins told my parents, and it was the first sign my cousins had been brainwashed. I asked my mom what her response was, and she said, "We just laughed. It was so ridiculous. We had no idea what was coming. I mean, no one had heard of a cult." By the time they left for Jonestown, my dad says he knew he would never see them again. But at the same time, he was shocked when it happened. We have letters from their time in the church all the way up to Jonestown, so you can read their progression into brainwashing. In the end, Nancy freely took the Kool-Aid. Ronnie was injected with cyanide. Their deaths have been ever present in my family. Story 4. I had this friend growing up, and we were the best of friends. Our summers were spent sleeping in my parents' camper, swimming, and jumping on her trampoline. We would ride our bikes around town and did everything together. Growing up, my parents always sent me to church, Sunday school, and Bible camp. She never went to church and would kind of make fun of me for not being allowed to have Saturday sleepovers. She had a lot of doubts, but I really didn't care. She was my friend, and if she didn't believe in God, then whatever, who cares? Then, her mom got sick. They kept her illness very private, but it became obvious. She lost a ton of weight, stopped working, and slept a lot. Around this time, my friend's family joined a church. It was called New Life Church. My best friend got super into this church, and she would invite me to their youth group, and it seemed okay. We would eat chicken burgers and watch Sister Act 2. One day she asked me if I wanted to have a Saturday sleepover and attend Sunday service with her family. My parents were okay with it because they assumed it was just like normal church. It was not normal church. It was a new wave Christian church, and their minister was a faith healer. I mean, people speaking in tongues, and he would perform healing ceremonies. People would come up to him, and he would use his palm to smack them on their foreheads, and they would shake on the ground. He told people that he could use God's power to heal cancer. It was scary, and the people attending fully believed that this man could save them. On the way home from the service, my best friend's mom asked me what I thought. I was honest and said it was weird and nothing like my church. She asked if I would go back, and I said it wasn't the right fit for me. After that, my best friend was not allowed to hang out with me. If her mom saw her talking to me around town, she would yell at her. My best friend told me that it was because her mom said I didn't have a pure Christian heart. Her parents ended up putting her in the church's private school for a few years, and by the time she came back, we were in high school and she was far gone. Her mom died when we were about 19. Her dad left the church, but she did not. She met her husband and they have 2 adorable children, but she is in so deep. I miss my best friend, and I'm sad that church took advantage of them and gave her mom false hope. Story 5. Not exactly a cult, but my aunt became a born-again Christian and joined this crazy fundamentalist church. Within a few months, she married a man she met there and pulled her kids out of public school and enrolled them at the church's tiny private school. The church doesn't allow women to cut their hair, so she quit her job as a hairstylist. She started wearing ankle-length skirts and made my cousin do the same. My cousin wasn't allowed to wear normal clothes. When we went on our annual beach vacation, my cousin couldn't wear a bathing suit. She had to wear knee-length board shorts and a t-shirt. Joining that church completely changed my aunt's personality. She used to be a really cool person. She would take me and my cousins to do all kinds of fun stuff when we were kids. I remember her being my fun aunt. She was also a talented painter and extremely creative. She doesn't paint at all now. She became completely submissive to her new husband, who is super manipulative and a compulsive liar. I don't think she's being physically abused, but she's not allowed to leave the house alone. She can only go places with her adult son or her husband. My mom tried to convince her to leave, and now she's banned from talking to my mom on the phone unless her husband supervises the conversation. He works from home, so he's literally always around to micromanage her life. Joining that church also changed my cousin's life. She was probably about 12 or 13 when this all happened. She wasn't allowed to cut her hair, and she was only allowed to wear full-length skirts and long sleeves. They wouldn't let her see her old friends. She was only allowed to associate with people from church. We lived in different states, but we were extremely close, and she used to come visit my family several times a year. Those trips stopped. I could only see her when we drove out to where they lived, and even then she wasn't allowed to be unsupervised with my mom, who was deemed a bad influence because she called my aunt and her husband out on their BS. It was really hard on my cousin. She ended up legally emancipating herself at 16 and moving in with our grandparents. It was an ordeal. The church school she had been going to was unaccredited and essentially useless, so she had to repeat a lot of high school online. The happy news is that my cousin finished high school, went to college, and now she's happily married to a great guy. She's totally normal and super cool. My aunt is still in the church, but honestly, now that my cousin is free from all that crap, I couldn't give a crap. I kind of hate her for what she put her daughter through. It definitely really hurts my mom, though. She was super close to my aunt their entire lives until she joined this church. Now they have basically no relationship. Their phone calls and visits are supervised by her husband. All she ever wants to talk to my mom about is converting her and saving us from going to hell. Even though my mom is a Christian and goes to a normal church every Sunday. It's really sad. I feel bad for my mom, especially since their other sister passed away suddenly a couple of years ago. My mom has been pretty lonely. She tells me sometimes she feels like she's lost both of her sisters. When someone's this deep in the sauce, yeah, absolutely would feel like you lost them, because the them you knew is just not there anymore. And it also sucks because, considering how OP described it, if the husband is manipulative and controlling and micromanages everything, there's no way for the aunt to get out. There simply isn't. It would have to somehow just come to her or have some revelation or something, but this is pretty, unfortunately, typical controlling and essentially abusive behavior emotionally, just under the guise of religion. Story 6. I was in what I would personally deem a cult. They had a ruse of being a very hip, non-denominational Christian church. You may know of them. The pastor wears jeans and high-fashion button-up shirts. The band plays alternative Christian rock. There's a coffee shop, etc. However, I think the church sort of morphed into that in the 15 years I attended to become more appealing. This church had a hell of a lot of layers, and as the kid of the associate pastor of the church, I pretty much knew all of them. I had been going to this church since I was 4, and from that point forward, my family had become extremely devout. We were there nearly every night of the week. Bible studies, 3 sermons on Sunday, 1 sermon on Wednesday, worship practice, babysitting events, list goes on. One summer, I couldn't have been older than 9, I spent every morning cleaning the church. Still can't remember why I was required to clean the church so much, but it kept me there all the time. At 11, the church opened up a school. It was literally just a money sucker. When I say money sucker, I mean $2,000 per school year roughly, possibly more later down the road, all for you to learn and relearn the same subjects. because once you got to a certain point in education, they would make you redo it, because there was no point in you learning anything else. You were just going to end up being a church pawn anyway. We'd pledge to the Christian flag, the Bible, and American flag every morning, and had hour-long Bible study lessons. We had to memorize so much scripture, and would be tested and retested on these scriptures we were supposed to know by heart every Friday. If we got in trouble, we sometimes would be assigned lines, which usually was also a scripture verse. Anyway, this church bred loyalty, and anyone who left would suddenly have a seriously terrible rumor spread about them, to make it seem like whoever did leave had some sort of mental breakdown or they were a wolf in sheep's clothing the whole time. It was pretty screwed up, because one minute I would have a friend I thought I would have for life, and the next minute their mom would suddenly leave and the rumor would be, oh, she married a Muslim man and converted. Oh, God forbid. My church thought they were way freer than Muslims, or that they were stealing money or just whatever they came up with, basically. This was always most unsettling when a church great would leave. People who had been there for 10 plus years and were heavily involved in ministry. So I finally hit a point where I decided to leave the church for good at 20 to 21. This all happened because I ran into a girl who used to go to church at college. Funnily, she tried to avoid me, but my intense ministry attitude makes me really good at stalking people, and I would just berate them with friendliness until they would finally start talking to me. She left because her dad, who was an ex-minister, had been touching her and her sister, and the church covered it up. Not only that, they told them to forgive their father, saying that he's a changed man and he won't do it again. He did. I knew a lot of these details about the touching, but from the viewpoint of the church. See, the church got in trouble for it with the law. The pastors got arrested. They had really good lawyers, though, and got out. They even rebranded the church. However, they said changing the church name was totally not related to news articles posted with the old church's name. They also basically tried to call my friend a wolf and a liar, and that she never reported the incident to them. Basically, they smeared this poor girl's name even further within the church, as if her life wasn't hard enough. On top of that, when she tried to go into a real high school and get her transcripts from my old school, it basically pretended like she was never a student there. I think she graduated high school, but as a super senior because of that. Anyway, I was already becoming a doubting Thomas before this, but her story put the nail in the coffin. So, I left. But I basically lost everyone on my way out. Everyone judged me about what happened. I know they spread rumors that my dad was stealing money, but I didn't pay it any mind, because I realized, despite losing all of my friends, this life was already better. Some of my old church friends had tried to scold me, saying, "You know better." It made me sick. I see how much time and money they put into this church. Most of them are heavily in debt, because that church made your wallet frickin' hurt, and there's always something that kept you going there at least 5 to 6 days a week. And they were so isolated. I never noticed this until I left, but the church did the whole rumor stuff to keep you from talking to people outside. It's sickening and depressing and a cult in my eyes. Any group that isolates you from people not within that group is, not a great group to be in most of the time. And the feeling that being in this group makes you better than people who aren't in the group, which seemed to be the vibe here too. There were a lot of signs that would lead me to call this a cult as well. The isolation really is the big one though. Once again, pretty typical abuser tactic. If people don't know any different, they won't seek any different, or believe they deserve any different either. It's some scary manipulation, man. OP, I'm glad you made it out. Story 7. My older brother joined a cult. He had a huge drinking problem most of his life and drug problems in high school. He joined the Coast Guard after high school, but he was getting into trouble at work, coming in hungover all the time and not really caring about his job. One of his superiors, despite the trouble at work, really cared about him and wanted to help him. He recommended that my brother start going to church. So he did. It really turned things around for the better. My family and I were all so proud of him, and he was really happy for the first time in a long time. And then it just progressed from there. What first seemed helpful started to get out of control. The cult that he's in he found online. Obviously they don't say, "I'm a cult," but my bro saw it as an online community that supported his religion, made him feel like he had others to talk to. At first we thought he was just taking this whole religion thing too seriously, but then he went AWOL for one of their meetups/functions. He ended up getting discharged from the military, and then he began calling my parents less and less. He moved to the city where the cult is based out of and got some job using connections from the church. Him and I were still close, and we called and emailed a few times a week. Starting before his discharge from the CG, in just about every conversation he would bring up doomsday, punishment, and hell. Eventually he began telling me that God told him that he can't change me, and that unless I decide to accept Jesus as my savior, he could no longer contact me. We haven't talked in years. I was the last one he cut off. He still talks to our biological dad once every few months. My brother told my dad that God spoke to him through prayer and told him he still got a chance to save my dad. I honestly think he's just too afraid to completely let go of his old life and entire family, and that's why he still keeps contact with my dad. He gets updates on me through him, but I've come to terms with the possibility of never seeing my brother again. After his discharge from the military, he met a girl from the cult and they have 3 lovely children. Seriously, they're adorable. While I don't agree with his beliefs and being cut out of his life hurt a lot, I'm happy that he's content and he found somewhere he belongs. He seems like a great father. Story 8. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness and grew up with most of my family being a part of the religion. When I was 10, my mother left the church and was disfellowshipped, shunned, as she had my sister out of wedlock. I was told I could not associate with her after I became an adult, and that started me on the path to leaving this Christian group. Later on, at age 23, after not attending church for close to 5 years, I was also disfellowshipped for having a child while single. This meant that everyone in my family besides my mother and half-sister could no longer talk to me. My father, stepmother, stepbrother, aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends, all of them gone. It can be emotionally devastating. My mother took her own life exactly 2 years ago today. I have a beautiful son, an incredibly supportive and loving husband, and a new family who has helped me to start healing these wounds. If anyone who is going through a similar situation ever needs a listening ear, there is a huge community, including myself out there, who can aid in the healing process. Story 9. I dated a girl many years ago. We dated for quite a while and even discussed a marriage. She wasn't an atheist, but she was very indifferent about religion and God. She started reading books about being spiritual. She explained it as believing in a higher power but not following a religion. That didn't bother me. She was into cosplay and Renaissance fairs. She had a few friends who were into it too. They seemed cool. She started hanging out with 2 of the girls a lot. They were into this spiritualism, and one of them was into some kind of paganism. I didn't really care for that one. But my girl was unbelievably intelligent and strong-willed. I wasn't too worried. Well, I should have been. She eventually sat me down and told me she'd been going to this pagan friend's religious rituals. She said it was a sect of Wicca. She'd said she'd seen amazing things at these ritual services, and even cast a few minor spells of her own that really paid off. She told me one was for her to pass one of her graduate course requirements, basically a big researched speech, and she passed. Yeah, no duh. She was a straight A student from 1st grade through college. She was really smart. It had nothing to do with her spell. She claimed she passed because of these spells and prayers to earth deities. So I'm trying to take all of this in and understand, like, what the hell? Who are you? I was just frickin' lost in the sea of insanity. She finally tells me I need to join this group too. I tell her I don't even understand it and I'm very suspicious. She tells me daily life won't change, but we'll need to share our home with members who have fallen on hard times. She made it sound like a very good Samaritan type of religion. She also mentioned a 25% tithing that would unlock more beneficial spells. She kept saying the more we gave, the more people we would help, and the better spells we would get. Then we could use those spells to make more money so the 25% would come back to us, plus a lot more in other ways. I needed some time on this. I didn't know if she was serious or screwing with me or what. Over the next couple of days, I ask questions and get salesman answers. I tried to research it, but the internet wasn't nearly as informative as it is now. This was 20 plus years ago. She asks me to come with her to a ritual. Okay, I love her, so I'll give this one shot and see what's up. I was mostly going so I could try to formulate a plan to talk some frickin' sense into her. We get there at dusk. It's in the frickin' forest preserve. So first off, we're going to some religious ritual that's predicated on trespassing on county land and we can be arrested. Great. Well, we go and there's a circle of logs. There are like 40 people there. Half are pretty normal and half look homeless. The ritual is just this guy named Ronald talking about how the earth has power, and we can channel it to energize our souls. Lots of power of the mind through worshipping the earth. But he made it a point to constantly point out that he was the main conduit to this power. Everyone needed to be connected to him to bolster their souls. It was weird stuff. Afterward, everyone sat around drinking tea with a bunch of leaves he picked up off the ground. That was weird too. I didn't drink the tea. I listened to him as he went around chatting with people. One of the homeless-looking guys was talking about how he lost his apartment and was trying to save up for XYZ spells. It had a name, but I don't remember what it was. Something like profligate spells. I'm telling my friend to listen to the conversation, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that's Tom. He's some upper management at a bank. His wife left him because she was a tortured soul and refused our help." Our help? I think she's been doing this longer than she let on. Ronald comes over and starts asking what I thought of everything, and I have non-committal answers like, "It's given me a lot to think about." Now, he seemed nice enough, but he was obviously nuts. She and I ended up talking later, and she spills the beans. She's been into this for 5 months. She has 1 more month to decide if she wants to become a member. She tells me I have to join it too, or we break up. I'm praying this is some goofy phase and she'll grow out of it. So maybe I join, pretend to believe this garbage for a year, and then I get her out, maybe? Nope. She says the initiation ritual is to connect with Ronald. Yeah, you guessed it. Bang the leader. And it's not just women. If I were to join, I would have to get banged by Ronald too. Then, to strengthen all our powers, there will be a post-initiation group banging session with everyone else in the group. Then she tells me that she's been receiving power from the one girl who brought her into this. What does that mean? Apparently, when my girlfriend goes down on her, she's absorbing her power. And since she is connected to Ronald, she doesn't lose power. She just channels it? Yeah. Channels it into my girlfriend's tongue through her kitty. I was done. Crazy religion. Cheating on me with her friend and wanting me to get drilled in the butt by some lunatic cult leader. Yeah, no thank you. I told her I couldn't handle this BS and she went nuts, telling me I was selfish and I had a tortured soul that would never be quelled. She went off about how I was judging her. I just sat quietly and listened. Yeah, I was mad, but you can't argue with crazy. Eventually, she stopped, cried, and asked me to leave. That was it. We had many mutual friends. She got rid of almost all of her friends over the next year, the ones who weren't in the cult. She seemed to disappear for about a decade and no one knew anything about her. Then I heard from a mutual friend that my ex contacted her. Here's the story after I was gone. This is all secondhand. My ex dumped me and joined up with the cult. She dropped out of grad school. She eventually got a job as a manager at a gas station. She had like 10 people living in her 2-bedroom apartment. The leader guy was coming around to connect with whatever hole was available, hers, someone else's, whatever. She eventually lost her apartment because she couldn't support all these people who had been tapped out financially by Ronald, who I noted was driving a 7 Series BMW. He mentioned that acquiring it was due to his profligate spells, whatever. It was from collecting these 25% tithes from 40 to 50 idiots. Anyway, she moved in with someone else and a whole bunch of other cultists. They eventually bought some kind of farm and all lived like it was little frickin' house on the prairie. Ronald banged indiscriminately and everyone let him. Finally, after almost 10 years, she realized she wasn't happy and wanted to go back to school. Ronald punished her for even thinking about going back to school, which meant he locked her up and basically assaulted her for a month. When he let her go, she said she wanted to stay in the group and she was an idiot for wanting to go back to school. But as soon as she was able, she ran away. She went to her mother, who she had shunned when she joined. Her mother took care of her and got her back on her feet. She went back to school. Now she's a sociologist who works with people who've escaped cults. She's even written a couple of books about it. She seems to have a normal life now. She's married and has like 6 kids. Based on her Facebook page, a couple look pretty old, so I don't know if they're Ronald's kids. Anyway, I haven't spoken to her and I haven't even read her books. Quite honestly, that part of my past is a closed chapter. I'm happy she's safe and doing well, but I don't need to go opening that up again. And that's my story. Oh my God, OP, I feel like I just read a memoir. I will say, this, without a doubt, is definitely a cult. There's some that I feel like I have to be a little careful with how I talk about them because I don't know who believes in this stuff and who's listening. And there's some where it's like, well, it's not that harmful, but this one is clearly exploitative and terrible. I'm glad she made it out and is making it into a positive experience in her life, or at least a positive sort of influence on her life, and the fact that she's helping other people who might be like her and being exploited in the same ways. That is huge and amazing work. The cult itself sounds kind of terrifying though. That leader guy, Ronald, needs to be locked up. I don't know any other way to say it. He's just a predator, really. Taking advantage of people who just fall into his ruse. Disgusting stuff. And also, OP, great work on standing up for yourself and being like, this is crazy, I love you, but I can't do this. I'm out. That takes strength, especially when you really do love someone. Story 10. I've lost a friend of mine to an offshoot of ISIS in Bangladesh. It was back in 2014. He was a comp sci student, but most importantly, a poet. He was one of the most amiable people I've ever met. We used to hang out a lot in our hometown since he was one of the few of the same-aged friends I had back then. We were huge dreamers and very lazy workers. Till this day, I just try to make sense of the murder and the aftermath. Although he was an atheist, he was never loud about his belief system, since atheists were always shunned in our country. All of his very few blog posts are either poems or short stories. He was never active on social platforms either. If anyone knew his belief or disbelief, they did by personal attachments. So when I learned about the murder, I never suspected the actual cause could be his belief system. Someone sold him out, someone close. Maybe a friend from university. A Facebook page of this offshoot of ISIS claimed they murdered him for practicing atheism in personal life. They attacked him in his apartment, barred 2 of his friends, butchered him, stabbed him right in his skull, and he died bleeding. This death has given me some subtle ideas about death that weren't present even a year before when my father died. I understood that life isn't fair. Anyone anyone can just end you for no rhyme or reason, and that is exactly why I have to shout out my ideas no matter the cost. Before that event, I was a pro-death nihilist, and afterward, a life-savoring nihilist. Life goes on, yet he left a mourning girlfriend who still mourns, and some friends who don't eat certain foods that were his favorites. It's a death that I can't quite get accustomed to. Story 11. Most people wouldn't consider Southern Baptist a cult since it's pretty mainstream where we live, but the degree to which my father embraces it and the amount of time, effort, and money he puts into it, I think it's reasonable to call it cult-like. His parents raised him in it, but I remember as a very young kid that we didn't go to church as much as we would later. Just once a week, and sometimes we would miss a week and it wouldn't be a big deal. He got back into it when his dad died, and then doubled down when his mom passed several years later. He started forcing us to go to church 2 or sometimes 3 times a week. Those losses had a profound effect on him, and I guess he really wanted to buy back into the idea that he'll see his parents again. Can't really blame him for that, I guess. But it has put a considerable strain on my relationship with him, especially lately since he's made friends with this guy who is even more fundamentalist than my dad, and he's been bringing this guy around the house. This guy, and there's no other way to say it, is just straight up crazy. My dad is passionate about his beliefs. This guy is fanatical. The kind of person I would be worried might blow up an abortion clinic or something. I had a conversation with the guy shortly after the Vegas shootings, and he all but came out and said these people deserved to be shot for just going to a sinner's hellhole like Vegas. When you are that deep in the sauce that you believe people deserve to die because of your beliefs, I am much more willing to call it a cult. Or at least cult-ish behavior, you know? And it's unfortunate because cults and anything like them obviously prey on people who are vulnerable. And vulnerability can happen at any point in life for any reason, really. For OP's dad, it was the grief. Grief is a very potent point of vulnerability that gets a lot of people into a lot of trouble. OP, for the sake of your dad and yourself, really, I hope this fundamentalist guy gets removed from your life sooner rather than later. Story 12. It's a bit debatable if this was a full cult per se, but I consider it to be. Freshman year of college, I made friends with this girl who we'll call Megan. We both went through a bit of a religious struggle. She grew up in a very strict Catholic household with insane, by my definition, parents. She wanted to find a way to keep her faith without the crushing, toxic religious experience of her childhood. I was giving organized religion one final shot before I gave up entirely. We tried a few places, but nothing sat right. I gave up, slapped a non-believer tag on it, and moved on. Then she found home church. Once a week, a group of young people could just kick it and talk about how cool Jesus is. Then they would stick around and drink, play cards, and smoke hookah. I went a couple of times at Megan's request. The people were pretty nice and down to earth, or so I thought. So Megan starts going and finds a great place to explore her faith. Good for her! But then instead of just the Wednesday meetings, there are big local gatherings on Thursdays. Okay, but then there's Bible study on Friday. By sophomore year, Megan is going to religious gatherings 3 times a week. Not my cup of tea, but I guess not so strange. Except it isn't just 3 nights a week, because Megan is hanging out with them other nights too, but just for fun. Through my college years, I lived with Megan and a few other girls. One of these other girls, we'll call her Jane, decides to check out this home church. Jane goes to the original Wednesday meetings, but doesn't really want to commit more. This goes on for a few months, and Jane even starts to see a guy from the church. Things don't work out and Jane stops going. This is when she tells me about her experience. The people of the home church had basically shamed her for seducing this guy into a life of sin. They were banging. Let me tell you, Jane is the sweetest, kindest person you will ever meet. She wouldn't seduce a fly. Plus, they wanted her to commit to more and more days. To hang out, too. They basically set an ultimatum to get further involved or leave, so she left. In addition, they had some weird beliefs. For one, they rewrote a lot of history. Megan once came to me talking about how slavery in the Bible was actually indentured servitude, and indentured servants were mostly treated like beloved family members. Sure. More than that, they believed that who you spend time with in life is who you hang out with in heaven, so they were all going to heaven together. Anyway, we see Megan less and less as she spends more and more time with this group. And now we know from Jane that deep involvement is the only involvement. Megan gets rebaptized in their pool. They all live together in a few houses except for Megan and a few others. But once we graduated, Megan ended up moving in with them. Megan would sometimes try to get me to go, but after those few times in the beginning, it freaked me out. I would see her home church friends at events now and then, and they came off as chill hippies. But I heard other stories about their insular community. Once I made an offhand joke about losing a friend to the home church with a girl I'd met in class. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "You've lost a friend to that cult too?" I'd initially been calling it a cult as a defensive joke as my friendship with Megan strained, never using that word to her face, but then it really hit home. She started once a week but ended up doing religious meetings 3 to 4 times a week and spending almost every other night with them. They demanded further involvement and to cut off ties with other friends. They believed they were going to heaven together. They all lived in the same houses. They controlled behavior using shame. Megan constantly struggled with the guilt of banging with her boyfriend of 4+ years. I still considered her, and her me, one of my best friends until the last day of college. But while the rest of my roomies were helping me pack up my U-Haul and crying with me in my final hours before moving cross-country, she just couldn't miss one damn home church meeting. And there it is. Another seemingly completely innocuous situation that just turns out to be kind of horrifying. Cutting someone off from the people who care about them and telling them that they're better this way. That it's all for the best in the long run. That the big guy upstairs approves of this or whatever. I've mentioned this before on this channel, but I'm not a person of faith. That being said, I also hold no negative judgment whatsoever to people who are of faith. We believe different things, and I don't believe I'm wholly right. I am completely open to the possibility that I am wrong, so I guess that makes me more agnostic, definitionally. But if your faith at any point requires you to cut people out of your life and get more and more insulated in a community, it's at least time to examine what's happening around you, because that is a very common abuse tactic. This kind of manipulation sneaks up on you, and I don't even blame anyone for getting caught up in it. I don't think people are stupid for falling for it. Some of the smartest people in the world can fall for it. It all matters when it hits you, and if you are able to get to a point where you can see the way out. It's all very complicated stuff. Anyway, that's all the stories we have for today. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.